The world was told that war would bring peace, that bombs could silence chaos. But when the fire fell on Iran, it didn't just strike military bases, it struck the conscience of nations. What began as a mission to destroy awakened something far more dangerous, a storm no one could control. They said it was necessary, they said it would be swift, they said it would prevent the unthinkable in the silence before the sirens. The world watched with bated breath. Aircraft carriers moved like shadows across the Persian Gulf, laden with weapons meant not just to destroy, but to redefine global order. The doctrine was clear: bomb Iran for peace, but peace does not come from the roar of jets, not from the flashing lights in the sky, and certainly not from the flames that engulf homes, hospitals, and hopes. In a war room buried deep beneath Washington, advisors spoke in cold logic. Targets, schedules, damage estimates. In Tehran, silence held for mere hours. Then the sky split open. The first wave was precision, or so they called it. Military radar stations, airfields, defense installations, all struck with blinding efficiency. The second wave was broader. Infrastructure, communications, fuel reserves. The lights across entire provinces dimmed, not just in electricity, but in spirit. Iran responded. Missiles launched from hidden bunkers, striking US bases in Iraq and Syria. Oil prices soared overnight. World markets dipped. But it wasn't just economics that shifted. It was something far deeper. The illusion of invincibility had cracked. In mosques across the Middle East, the cries for justice grew louder. Not just from Iran, but from Yemen, Lebanon, Iraq, and even parts of Saudi Arabia. They asked, who gave permission to destroy a nation in the name of peace? In Israel, bomb shelters filled. In Europe, diplomatic hotlines rang endlessly. Russia watched with calculation. China moved its fleets closer to the Indian Ocean. This was no longer about Iran. This was about the unraveling of the global balance. Inside Iran, the damage was devastating, but something unexpected emerged. People united. Clerics and secularists, conservatives and reformists, Sunni and Shia, old and young, not in hate, but in resilience. They didn't beg for mercy. They didn't cry for retreat. They stood in the rubble with hands raised, not in surrender, but in defiance. A father in Shiraz dug through a destroyed school, not for weapons, but for the crushed books of his daughter. A mother in Mashhad wrapped her child in the Iranian flag as missiles rained again. A soldier with a broken leg refused evacuation, saying, "If I crawl, I still protect my soil." The campaign was called Operation Endgame. But for Iran, it was only the beginning. Cyber attacks spread like wildfire. Ports from Haifa to Dubai jammed. GPS signals around the Strait of Hormuz distorted. Oil tankers rerouted. The global economy began to cough and then wheeze. NATO was divided. Some supported the strike. Others demanded an end. Turkey blocked US access to Incirlik Air Base. Germany pulled its diplomats from Baghdad. In the UN, voices once silent thundered, accusing, warning, pleading. The irony was brutal. The more bombs dropped, the stronger Iran's spirit became. In a mountain cave in the Zagros Range, Iran's top general spoke to a gathering of regional militias. He said, "You cannot destroy a nation with fire when its heart burns brighter than your missiles. We were not born from peace. We were born from resistance, and that resistance echoed." ISIS launched a new wave of drones. Hezbollah warned of a second front. Militias in Iraq seized foreign convoys. The region pulsed with tension. The architects of the bombing strategy began to whisper fears they never voiced aloud. What if the strike did not weaken Iran, but created the very monster they sought to prevent? In Washington, debates raged. Some said double down, finish it. Others said pull out, cut loss. The president addressed the nation. With a steely face, he spoke of duty, justice, a world free from nuclear threat. But on Iranian television, an old man held up a photograph, a building gone, his son beneath it. He said, "I have only one question for your justice. Where does my child's peace begin?" The question haunted millions. The phrase "bomb for peace" began to echo with a bitter tone. Protesters in London, demonstrations in Berlin, young people in Tokyo and Jakarta holding signs, "Are not in our name," civil disobedience, cyber leaks, military dissent. The world began to fracture, slowly but visibly. And yet Iran endured. Oil fields were burning, cities shaken, but the people stood, proud, wounded but unbroken. In the ashes of calm, a cleric stood atop a ruined mosque and recited verses not of vengeance, but of patience. In Tehran, artists painted murals of peace from the remains of broken walls. In Tabriz, a woman handed out food to strangers, saying, "I let them see our humanity before they hear their leaders speak." The ground war was never officially declared, but it crept forward anyway. Special forces, raids, drone strikes, convoy ambushes, retaliations. The desert became a chessboard of shadows. But Iran had one weapon no satellite could detect, resolve, and as the world's leaders reconsidered their decisions, they began to see what war had truly created. Not submission, not fear, but an awakened nation. To be continued, the dust never really settled. It simply shifted, carried by the wind, the smoke, and the voices of those who refused to be silenced. Iran did not crumble as predicted. It adapted, it transformed, and it remembered. In every corner of the country, the question echoed louder than the bombs. How can destruction lead to peace? American analysts were baffled. Every model, every simulation, every war game had predicted collapse within days. But they hadn't calculated for conviction. They couldn't measure belief. Sanctions tightened. Power grids failed. Blackouts rolled across cities like waves. Yet in the dark, candles were lit. Not just for light, but for unity. Weddings continued under stars. Prayers echoed from rooftops. Children painted flags with ashen soil. The war meant to break Iran. Instead forced it to reach inward and find something far older than missiles, its soul. Across the Middle East, alliances once fragile were hardening. Iraq's parliament voted to expel foreign troops. Jordan warned of regional chaos. Even Egypt, long silent, began reconsidering its position. Old enemies shook hands. Sunni and Shia fighters trained together in the hills. They were no longer just defending a country. They were defending the idea that dignity cannot be bombed away. Inside the Pentagon, unease grew. The narrative had lost its grip. Surgical strikes had become a euphemism for mass suffering. Civilian death tolls leaked. Journalists, despite being blocked, smuggled footage to the world. Children screaming. Hospitals overwhelmed. An old man clutching a Quran beneath rubble, his eyes wide, his lips still whispering a verse. On social media, the phrase "bomb Iran for peace" transformed into a symbol of imperial hypocrisy. Viral videos from within Iran showed not hate, but courage. Volunteers digging through ruins. Teens reciting poetry in shelters. Elderly women serving tea to strangers at checkpoints. It wasn't the face of a defeated nation. It was the heart of a people forged in fire. The third week brought the unthinkable. Iran struck the Fifth Fleet, not with bombs, but with technology. GPS jamming shut down an entire naval route. Drones were intercepted mid-air. Even a satellite feed was hijacked, broadcasting a single message. You have the weapons, we have the will. Let's see which breaks first. That message rippled through command centers. It wasn't just defiance, it was challenge. In the streets of America, things began to shift. Military funerals returned home quietly. Flags flew at half-mast, but questions grew louder. Why? What for? What have we won? Senators demanded briefings. Congress held emergency hearings. Intelligence leaks painted a grim picture, civilian casualties rising, Iranian defences evolving, global sympathy turning. The war that was meant to end threats had now birthed a movement. From Jakarta to Johannesburg, protests surged. Artists painted Iran's ruins on city walls. Activists wore keffiyehs not for fashion, but for solidarity. A new generation, disillusioned by power, began asking what peace truly looks like. Inside Iran, new leaders emerged. Not generals, not politicians, but survivors. A teenage girl named Layla, who lost her family in an airstrike, began posting daily videos from a refugee tent. Her calm voice, her smile, her refusal to hate. Millions followed her. She said, "They want us to fight with hate, but our revenge is to live. Proud, free, human." That message burned deeper than any missile. By the end of the first month, the US found itself caught in a storm of its own making. Diplomats scrambled. Allies hesitated. War had not weakened Iran. It had exposed the fragile morality of those who claimed to defend peace with fire. Even soldiers began to question. Leaked letters from Marines in Kuwait spoke of doubt, of nightmares, of regret. The president held another press conference. He spoke of strategy, security, honour. But outside the gates, thousands chanted Layla's name, not as a victim, but as a symbol. Meanwhile, Iran's strategy shifted again. It wasn't about military retaliation. It was psychological. Cyber networks disrupted global corporations. Anonymous whistleblowers revealed oil deals and more profiteering. The truth spread faster than propaganda. A Western journalist smuggled out a report titled "The Nation That Refused to Die." It described villages rebuilt from ruins, farmers planting crops in cratered fields, engineers repairing water lines by hand, a people not asking for aid but asserting their right to stand. Even nature seemed to join the resistance. As winter approached, snowfall covered bombed cities like a shroud. Children threw snowballs on roads once scorched by fire. A little boy carved the word salam into the frost on a tank's hull. In the Kremlin, Russian officials saw opportunity. In Beijing, quiet support became active logistics. Iran, once isolated, was no longer alone. The global south began aligning not just in sympathy, but in strategy. In the United Nations, an emergency session turned historic. A resolution condemning the bombing passed with record support. The ambassador of a small African nation said, "If peace needs bombs, it is not peace. It is tyranny in disguise." The next day, a convoy of aid trucks crossed from Turkey into northern Iran. No flags, no banners, just food, medicine, and the eyes of the world watching. And still the people endured. A child born during a raid was named Saber. Patient, an old man whose home was levelled, began teaching children the poetry of Heist Under a Tree. And a blind woman in Isfahan played the santur every dusk, its melody drifting through the ruins like a prayer. Iran was not just surviving, it was living louder than ever. Truth could no longer be hidden. Not by policy, not by power, not by the press briefings. Bomb Iran for peace had failed, not because the bombs didn't fall, but because peace was never born from fear. Somewhere in a quiet office in Washington, a speechwriter stared at a blank page, realizing that no words could explain what had been unleashed. To be continued, they expected Iran to break, but it didn't break. But it didn't break, it remembered. It resisted, and it rose. As winter deepened, so did the cracks in the global coalition that had once nodded in silent approval. What was once presented as a clean tactical mission had spiraled into a human catastrophe, and no amount of political spin could smother the truth, now screaming from the ashes.